by gaslighting people regarding Meghan Markle's podcast? I think that's a super interesting question because somehow she's the top podcast, but never even made it into the top 5 of podcast episodes. That seems kind of fishy to me because honestly, if you are the #1 rated podcast, if everybody's watching your stuff, you should have the top 3 spots like Joe Rogan does, or at least hit the #1 spot. But that she hasn't even hit the top 5. I think the highest her episode got was at least 9, maybe a little bit higher. How in the world is she the #1 podcast on the podcast list at Spotify? I think they're cooking the books behind the scenes, and I kind of understand why. So I'm going to explain to you guys a bit my thoughts on this. Obviously, I know nothing about the internal workings of Spotify or Meghan Markle's podcast, but I also have eyes and am a reasonably intelligent human being, and I usually can kind of figure out when somebody's kind of trying to fake something because it's kind of obvious. But anyways, guys, if you haven't been here to Royal News Network before, my name is Brittany, and we talk about everything related to royals, so that's news, gossip, fashion, jewelry, television shows, movies, and history. We'll do it all right here. I'm currently on my last day in Poland. I'll be flying out very soon, and I have actually a whole video. I'm so excited. I got like a ton of B-roll. I did a little bit of filming, like talking to the camera while I was at the castle, and I think I keep pronouncing Warl. It's maybe Warl Castle over in Poland in Krakow. It is kind of like the home seat of Poland's royal family, which really hasn't been in power in the last 200 years. But there's a castle and there's a dragon. So I will be pulling that video all together here very, very soon. And I'm super excited about that because I want to do more of those because I feel like those are super fun. And I do want to expand beyond Harry and Meghan. I have a lot of content regarding them because just because they're in the news and everybody talks about them, and they really are a very interesting and weird oddity in the royal world. But I also love royals in general. So I will be hopefully doing more of those videos. I actually have a couple of videos from London I still need to probably do. And so those will be coming rather soon as well. But like I said, is Spotify cooking the books? I think they are. I really, really do. Honestly. And I understand why they want Meghan Markle's podcast to do well. They paid her and Harry, what, like $20 million for them to have a very successful podcast? And they can't do it. The podcast debuted while I was basically on a work trip. It's mostly work, a little bit of holiday wrapped in there as well. And the place I was staying at had like no internet connection like at all. So it was not only was it hard to get the episode together, it was like impossible to upload. So anyways, they dropped the podcast with no press or anything like that. So it was all of a sudden like, boop, there's a podcast. And I understand how this has worked for Beyonce and Taylor Swift and I think and a couple others. But I really think Meghan needed probably maybe a bit more kind of engine chugging. Anyways, so we were told that this first episode was going to be about Serena Williams, and I've heard that the podcast is basically her talking about her and just a little bit of Serena Williams. She's actually accomplished a lot. Meghan Markle, she's married her influence and she's married her success. That's basically all she's done. So the episode debuted, and obviously it did go viral. I'm not doubting that at all because obviously, she is a huge name, and her and Harry to a certain extent are a huge draw. But I also think they are deeply, deeply mired in controversy and people just in toxicity, and people are just to a certain extent people hate watch them kind of. There's a couple of shows I hate watch. The Hunt for Civil War Gold, I've watched that on the History Channel. Hate it to goodness because the history is horrifically bad. It's so bad. Don't know why I watch it. And Windy City Rehab, which is a show where the woman talks about that she wants to preserve history and then literally rips it all out of the homes and then just puts a couple of trinkets in there because, it's history. No, it's not, honey. Like literally she rips apart old buildings. It drives me bonkers. Anyways, so I think a lot of people did hate watch this. And some people were curious, and obviously there was kind of the big news. Archie's nursery caught on fire, and of course it came out later that it was just like a little heater that might have been a little bit smoking. That's not a fire. That's just, things smoke occasionally. That doesn't always mean fire. But of course, everything with Meghan, I think part of the problem is everything with Meghan has to be exaggerated. And as this time is going on, I think she's having to reach and kind of push things further and further and further on her anti-royal narrative to get people to pay attention. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. And I think we're kind of seeing the impact of that and how like things are just kind of like every time you hear something about her, it's like, is she telling us the truth? I don't know, because people always basically question her because she constantly exaggerates things, and that is never more clear than it was in The Fire. I mean, again, she was staying at like this huge mansion. Everything was being taken care of for them, and apparently, basically, the South Africa has told her, you are never coming back. We don't want you back. Because, I mean, I get we're kind of getting off the track with the podcast, but I think it is good to mention that royals are diplomats. As a diplomat, generally, it's not a good idea to shame your host country. It's not. Good diplomats don't do that. If something happens like that, I mean, absolutely, things happen. That's okay. And it's just kind of like, well, it was just kind of a fluke thing. Let's just forget it and move on because we are enjoying your country. We are diplomats. We are trying to represent your country. And, Harry and Meghan were supposedly trying to represent the broader Commonwealth. But Meghan can't do that. And Meghan just, again, doesn't understand the intricacies of anything she does, basically. And it's seemingly, anyways, that's my opinion. And so, like, that she kind of went off this and decided to shame South Africa was just an incredibly stupid move. It just was. So again, getting back to this podcast and Spotify. So Spotify knew to a certain extent they had somewhat of a hit on their hands. I mean, they do. People had the curiosity. I totally get that. But the idea that she's number one, I have huge questions about, especially against Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan has the most influential podcast out right now. People devour it. People love it. He gets like 11 million viewers. I don't know if it's per week or per episode, but if it's like, I think it's 11 million per episode. That is gigantic. He's a huge, huge name in the podcast game. He's been doing this for years. He interviews unique people. He has a conversation with them. It lasts for hours and hours. Like he just had this huge conversation with Mark Zuckerberg, who admitted that Facebook decided to limit views of the Hunter Biden laptop story, which basically could have to a certain extent swung the 2020 election. That's huge news. And he gets huge news out of people. I mean, he's interviewed Elon Musk. He's interviewed just a whole ton of people from all different walks of life, all different political persuasions, and he has a conversation with them. And people in this day and age of woke politics love that because they want people who are willing to have a conversation, sit down from opposite viewpoints. He challenges them, and if they're really good on top of their game, they kind of push back and go, "Hey, this is my perspective." And I think that's the beauty of free speech. That's the beauty of something like a podcast. And I see the appeal, the long-lasting appeal of Joe Rogan's podcast because he's not playing to the mob. He's playing to himself and he's playing to his audience, which wants generally podcasts and content that reflects a broader view than just his own. But that's not what Meghan's doing. And I understand there's like a lot of giggling and just sounds kind of like unprofessional. I've done interviews for a living and they haven't really been broadcasted, but there is, you do kind of talk and gab. That's if you have a really good interview and if you have really good rapport with someone, that happens. And especially if you're on a podcast, it's more, I don't know. Again, it would depend on the format she's going for, but if she's really trying to have conversations, yes, she asks questions and she lets them answer, but they also kind of run into a dialogue. My understanding from what I've seen is basically it's Meghan talking about, like Serena mentions something and Meghan has to mention something that happened in her own life. And that's constantly how it goes, and Meghan talks most of the time. That's kind of a terrible interviewer. You're a terrible interviewer if you're dominating the conversation. That should not be happening. A typical interview, it's an interviewee that gets to talk a lot, which, can be hit and miss sometimes. I've had people who chat way too much and people who don't chat enough. It's kind of the nature of the beast. But like they should have a great conversation. And it was a coup for Meghan to get Serena Williams because Serena Williams is retiring. That's kind of a big deal. And it's all about like ambition and stuff. And I'll get into the ambition thing because again, it was fine that Meghan wanted to be ambitious as a royal, but she wanted to dominate the royal family. That was her ambition. That's not how it works, especially when you're the wife of the sixth in line. That's not how it works. Anyways, so again, Meghan would have this draw, no doubt about it. But is she the number one podcast? Or should she be the number one podcast? No, she should not, especially because her one episode could not beat 3 of Joe Rogan's. 3. That should not happen, because if you're the number one podcast, you should also be the number one episode, especially when you only have one episode. Now, if Meghan had like as many as Joe Rogan does, Joe Rogan has like a massive library. I mean, he's been doing this since basically the beginning. So he has, I think, thousands, hundreds, if not thousands of episodes. I haven't really looked, but you know, he has so many episodes. So if it's the most popular podcast, that means also people are constantly listening to old episodes. That's what I found on my channel, is that my channel has grown. People say, oh, I saw one episode, and then I went back and went and listened through your entire catalog. Now, Joe Rogan's episodes, I guess, are like 3 or 4 hours. So I don't know if I would personally have the stamina to listen to an episode for that long, but people do for him. And I have no doubt people are going back through and listening to old episodes in his catalog, especially because he has a more kind of, he does newsy things, but also does some evergreen content, which is a good mix. So the conversations, though, maybe they're talking about political things that are older, they still have relevance because they're talking about other things too. So how in the world is Meghan's podcast number one? It doesn't make sense. It just really doesn't. Right now, so Meghan's first episode is currently at the 13th spot. This is obviously a decrease from where it was, because obviously she's only brought out one episode. My understanding is Joe Rogan does, and he has over 1,800 episodes. That's a huge catalog. And Mark Zuckerberg currently is the number one episode on podcast. As far as I know, because I've been checking this every day, Meghan's episode, her one episode, has never hit number one spot. Joe Rogan has the first 3 right now. It's currently Mark Zuckerberg, Mike Baker, and Tim Dillon. Those are the top 3 episodes on Spotify for Joe Rogan. Next one for Meghan is, Meghan's currently at 13. I'm just going to see if there's any other Joe Rogan podcasts here in the top whatever list this is. Okay, I don't really see any. So Joe Rogan obviously has this huge appeal. And so like the idea that Meghan's number one is weird. It's very weird. The number one podcast. So is that really true? Now, we've also seen somewhere where it's quote unquote the most shared. What does that mean? And I thought it would be interesting because I actually looked this up just because I wanted to know, how is Spodcast determining who gets the top spot? So on its website, it says top podcasts is where you'll find the overall most popular shows, ones fans have been listening to for some time, and rising newcomers. It's determined by a combination of overall follower counts and the number of recent unique listeners. So I probably, on Instagram, if I messaged you and I said it seemed like new and interesting was part of their metric of how they promoted content. So I think I did misread this when I first read it. However, I think it's interesting. Ones fans have been listening to for some time and rising newcomers. Now, obviously, it says it's a combination of overall follower counts and the number of unique listeners. But who would that be? That would be Joe Rogan. That's not Meghan Markle. That's not Archetypes. So why is her podcast number one? Well, I think it's kind of that first stipulation there where it says one's fans have been listening to and quote unquote rising newcomers. I think this gives kind of Spotify an option to push her podcast to the top because they have put a ton of money behind Harry and Meghan, and I think they've been a bear to work with. I don't think Spodcast is happy. I think Spotify. Oh, that's funny. Okay. I think Spotify is frustrated. I think they're, to a certain extent, probably angry because they have been working with Harry and Meghan for over a year, 2 years this coming fall. And they've managed to only produce 2 episodes. And on top of that, if Meghan has all her 12 episodes together, 13 overall episodes, that's all they've done in 2 years. That's pathetic. It really is. Joe Rogan does massively long interviews and produces content that comes out, I think, daily, 5 days a week at least, or maybe 3 days a week. That's a ton of content production, a ton of it. And he does it in a much shorter period of time. And Harry and Meghan can't do it. They can't put it together. So Spotify is trying to recoup their investment. And the way they're doing this, I think, is that they're trying to, they knew it would have an impact. And I think there were a decent amount of people who did listen to it. but the reviews were terrible. It's currently at 4.0 in terms of reviews. And instead of, it's out of 5, Joe Rogan's says 4.8. I think there's a lot of cooking going on behind the scenes. And it could be a combination of Sunshine Stacks, but obviously here's the thing. Spotify owns Meghan Markle and Joe Rogan. They're not worried about Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan's gonna be fine. Even if they say right now Meghan Markle's number 1, Joe Rogan's gonna be fine. There's his production, everything will be perfectly okay if Meghan is number 1. But Meghan is the issue. Meghan is a concern because they don't know if her podcast stands the test of time. They don't know it yet. And I think because they've kind of cooked the books, they're legitimately worried about it. So they're going to tell everybody it's number 1. You have to tune into this. It's going to be the best thing ever. Even if she can't even hit the top 5 in the United States in terms of episode watch, it is number 1. And I think that most shared metric that they're showing on her page, I think is interesting, and it could be something internal for them. Because again, I think they're trying to justify putting her at number 1 because she's not a cultural flashpoint. She's a cultural kind of antagonist. Like, people either love her or hate her. There's not really a ton of in between. I mean, people are ambivalent, but there's either a love or hate relationship with Meghan Markle. She doesn't have, I mean, people don't like Joe Rogan, but generally people are like, well, you know, I'm not maybe a fan of everything he does, but hey, I give him mad props for talking to other people, or that his content is somehow interesting. Like, I was surprised somebody who I would think is rather liberal and maybe not interested in Joe Rogan says that she listens to Joe Rogan during long road trips. And I was genuinely surprised. And I'm like, okay, so he's a culture, like, people enjoy listening to him. There's not that same enjoyment with Meghan. She'll get the curiosity view. And I think Spotify knows this. And I think Spotify would have let it just run its course if they were confident in it. I think pushing it to the top was an overplay by Spotify's part. And I think it was incredibly stupid. It could have been number 2. Make it number 2. But they wanted, I think, the news clicks from going, oh, look, Meghan's queen of Spotify. But they knew that wasn't right. And anybody with half a brain knows you can't have somebody else with the top 3 episodes on Spotify in terms of watch and have somebody else be number 9 and think that they're beating the guy who has 3 episodes at the top 3 spots. That makes no sense. Spotify, I think, completely overplayed their hand. They wanted to gaslight people. They want people to get invested. They know she's problematic. They know she's divisive. They know she rubs people the wrong way. And they can't make her more likable. So what did they do? They overdid it. They way overdid it. Number 2 would have been completely fine, I think, in my opinion. I think Spotify overplayed their hand and also showed their cards. They're nervous. They're legitimately concerned. This Harry and Meghan thing has not gone well. It's not gone well. Because it should have been Harry and Meghan. Why it's just Meghan and not Harry is a mystery at this point. And I saw a couple things that mentioned the fact that maybe they're even separated already, living separate lives. I can't speak into any of that. Those are just rumors. No idea. But that she's launching this on her own could be a symbol that things are not going well behind the scenes. And obviously they're doing their pseudo-royal tour in September, but I think, so much of what they do is show that, I don't have a ton of faith in that being totally honest and legit. I just don't. So again, let me know your thoughts on this, because I just think this is really, really interesting. And I think it's fascinating how companies, they're stuck with Harry and Meghan. If you've signed on to the imploding brand that is Brand Sussex, you have a problem. The people you've signed to multi-million-dollar contracts over years are not likable. They don't have a broad appeal. They have a car crash mentality. Yes, people look, but it's not resulting in the same level of conversion, because part of this thing as well is companies want their listeners to convert to something. They want them to convert to paying for advertising dollars and those sorts of things. If you're not converting people, and let's just say too, what if people are only listening to the 5 minutes and then turning off? So yeah, maybe she has a ton of views, but nobody's really watching all that closely. Could totally be the case. But anyways, guys, let me know what you think, because I think Spotify is in a bind. And I think Netflix is too. And I don't think they totally know what to do about it. And maybe it's Harry's publisher as well. There's growing rumors that they're pushing back the book. And again, I think it's because Harry and Meghan have lost a lot of their credibility. If you don't believe them, if people don't broadly, believe Harry and Meghan and go, oh yeah, I listened to X and I really, really like them. And, I really think that they are telling, people aren't buying into the brand of Sussex, and that's a problem for Harry and Meghan. And it's a problem for Spotify and Netflix because they bought onto the brand Sussex when it was doing well. But now it's crashing and burning. And what did they do? They have no idea. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I hopefully will be back on a better schedule soon. I'm in an actual hotel room. I was just somewhere else. Internet was shoddy. I didn't have a place to film really, and it was also a very intense week, so I didn't even have much time anyways. So guys, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.